Statistically speaking, Ireland shouldn't be this successful. It's a tiny island that's been invaded, colonised and quite literally starved. Yet today it's a global powerhouse in tech, literature and Oscar-winning cinema. So how did a nation that plummeted to its knees in the 1800s transform into the Jekyll and Hyde economy of the modern world? Today we're tracing the journey from ancient Stone Age architects to the neon-lit streets of Dublin to find out how the Emerald Isle kept its soul while conquering the future. For the longest time, we actually thought humans didn't show up in Ireland until about 10,000 BC, but back in 2016, archaeologists found some old animal bones in a cave in County Clare that had clear butchery marks on them. Those bones were from 12,500 BC. That means people have been hanging out on the island since the end of the Ice Age. By the time the Neolithic period rolled around, these early Irish residents weren't just surviving, they were world-class architects. You know the famous pyramids of Giza? Well, the Newgrange Passage tomb in the Boyne Valley is actually older than they are. It was built around 3200 BC, and the engineering's mind-blowing. It's aligned so perfectly that on the winter solstice, a single beam of sunlight travels down a long tunnel to light up the floor of the inner chamber. It's like an ancient stone-built clock. Eventually, around 500 BC, the Celts arrived, bringing iron tools and a warrior spirit. More importantly, they brought the Gaelic language, which is still being used on the island today. Fast forward a bit to the Dark Ages. While the rest of Europe was basically falling apart, Ireland was having a massive golden age. Since the Romans never actually conquered the island, the local culture stayed totally unique. Then, in the 5th century, St. Patrick showed up and changed everything by introducing Christianity. But the Irish put their own spin on it. They built these huge monasteries that acted like the world's most important libraries and art studios. So while everyone else in Europe was busy fighting, Irish monks were carefully handwriting masterpieces like the Book of Kells. But as they say, all good things must come to an end. An end it did in the late 8th century. The Vikings definitely raided those peaceful monasteries, but they also stuck around to build Ireland's very first cities, like Dublin and Waterford. It took a legendary high king named Brian Boru to finally break their political power at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. But even though the Vikings were no longer in charge, the island was left with a bit of a struggle for power. Because without one strong king to hold everything together, local Irish kings started bickering and fighting over who should be the next in line for the throne. One of those kings was Diarmait mac Murchada. He got kicked out of his lands and decided to do something pretty risky. He reached out to the Normans in England, who were famous for being incredible knights. Well, the Normans showed up in 1169 to help him out, but they quickly realised they liked the place way too much to leave. So, by 1171, King Henry II of England decided to cross the sea himself to make sure these knights stayed loyal to him, declaring himself the Lord of Ireland. Have you ever invited a friend over and they just never left? That was the Normans. But the funny thing is, as the years went by, the Normans who settled there actually fell in love with the local way of life. They became more Irish than the Irish themselves. They started speaking Gaelic, wearing Irish clothes and following local customs. This drove the English crown absolutely crazy. It eventually got so bad that they passed the Statutes of Kilkenny in 1366. These are laws that literally banned English people from acting Irish. But, you guessed it, it didn't work. Things got much more serious in the 1500s and 1600s. British monarchs like Henry VIII and Elizabeth I wanted total control. This led to the Flight of the Earls, where the last great Irish chieftains had to flee to Europe. With the leaders gone, the English started plantations, which basically meant taking land from the Irish and giving it to British settlers. Then in 1649, Oliver Cromwell arrived with a brutal military campaign. The purpose of this invasion was to crush the Irish Catholic Confederacy, which posed a threat to the English Commonwealth government. In the end, the campaign led to the English conquest of Ireland, followed by penal laws against Catholics and the confiscation of their land. By the 1800s, Ireland was officially part of the UK, but life was incredibly hard. In 1845, the Great Famine hit, when a disease destroyed the potato crops. 1 million people died from hunger, and 2 million more had to leave for places like America. The population dropped so much that, even today, there are fewer people living in Ireland than there were before the famine. That pain turned into a powerful hunger for independence. So, in 1916, while the rest of the world was distracted by World War I, rebels staged the Easter Rising in Dublin. Even though they lost the battle, it started a fire that led to the Irish War of Independence. By 1921, they finally got a treaty, but there was a major catch. The island was split. 26 counties became the Irish Free State, but 6 counties in the north stayed with the UK. This split was so controversial, it actually caused a civil war between former friends. The South eventually became a full republic in 1948, but things stayed very tense in Northern Ireland for decades during a period called the Troubles. It was a long, difficult conflict, but finally in 1998, everyone signed the Good Friday Agreement. That brought a real, lasting peace, opened the borders, and allowed the island to start writing its next chapter together. And between the Republic of Ireland down south and Northern Ireland, the entire country covers about 32,595 square miles, or 84,421 square kilometres. To really get a feel for the land, though, you have to look at the 4 ancient provinces: Ulster, Connaught, Leinster, and Munster. Let's start our road trip way up in the northwest corner of Ulster in County Donegal. This place is wild, moody, and romantic, with mountains and moors that look like nobody's ever touched them. If you drive all the way to Malin Head, you're standing at the very top of the island, and just a stone's throw away are the Slieve League Cliffs. These are some of the tallest sea cliffs in all of Europe, dropping straight into the crashing Atlantic waves. Then, as you head inland through counties like Cavan and Monaghan, the ground starts to look like a giant egg carton. These are called drumlins, which is just a fancy word for those little rolling hills that look like green bumps in the earth. Hidden between them is a tiny spring called the Shannon Pot. It might not look like much, but that's actually the birthplace of the River Shannon, which is Ireland's longest river. Now, if we head west into Connaught, things get even more intense. Sligo and Roscommon have these beautiful, quiet lakes surrounded by trees, but County Mayo is where the landscape really starts to show off. It's got a huge mountain called Muil Rhea that stands 2,671 feet, or 814 metres tall, right on the edge of the ocean. Just off the coast of Mayo is Achill, which is the biggest island in the country. From there, if you head south, you'll hit Galway and the Connemara district. This is where the landscape really starts to play tricks on you. Because can you imagine a place that shifts from soft green valleys 1 minute to wild purple moorlands and sharp rocky peaks called the 12 Bends the next? It's so rugged and beautiful that poets have been writing about it for hundreds of years. As you move away from those rocky Atlantic peaks and swing over to the east coast, you enter the province of Leinster. This is where you find the Great Irish Plain, which is exactly what people imagine when they think of the Emerald Isle. It's a mix of bright neon green fields and deep brown patches of peat bogs. Then over in Westmeath, the land is dotted with lakes that can stretch for 5 or 6 miles, or about 8 to 10 kilometres. Eventually, those inland plains lead you right into the capital, Dublin. As you move south toward Kilkenny, the soil becomes rich and fertile, making it perfect for some of the world's finest farming. Which leads us to our final stop. As the farms of Kilkenny stretch further south and west, we hit Munster, which is basically the greatest hits of Irish scenery. In the eastern part of this province, you've got the Golden Vale, which has some of the most productive farmland on the planet. But as you head west into County Clare, the grass suddenly disappears, and the ground turns into a moon-like landscape of cracked limestone. This is where you'll find the world-famous cliffs of Moher, which have a maximum height of 214 metres, or 702 feet. Now, if you follow those cliffs even further south, you reach the real crown jewel, County Kerry. It looks like a mix of a snowy mountain range and a tropical coast. It's home to the highest peak in Ireland, Carrantuohill Hill, which reaches up to 3,407 feet, or 1,039 metres. It's pretty wild that in such a small space, you can go from a flat bog to a massive mountain in just an hour's drive. But if you thought the geography was a roller coaster, wait until you see the numbers behind the Celtic tiger. Ireland's economy is basically the overachiever of Europe, but it's a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde situation because of all the massive global tech and pharma companies based there. Right now, Ireland's GDP is forecast to grow by a massive 10.7% in 2025, with figures around $708 to $811 billion. And just to put that in perspective, most developed countries are happy with 2%. This surge was driven by a staggering 18.5% jump in the first half of the year, mostly because pharmaceutical companies were front-loading, which basically means shipping as much medicine as possible to the US to beat potential tariff changes. Because of this huge spike, things will look a bit quieter in 2026, with a predicted growth of just 0.2%, before stabilising at a healthy 2.9% in 2027. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, though, because while wages are growing at about 5%, inflation is the party pooper. Headline inflation hit 2.9% in October 2025. But if you look at the stuff that actually hits your wallet, like groceries and housing, those costs are climbing by 6% to 7%. This is why, despite the booming economy, consumer confidence is a bit shaky. People are making more money, but they're also paying a lot more for a sliced pan and a place to live, leading to higher household saving rates as everyone braces for uncertainty. Speaking of uncertainty, let's look at the big tech and pharma factor. Ireland's public finances are in a great spot, but they are heavily reliant on corporation tax from these giants. So if global trade gets messy, or US policies shift, those tax receipts could drop fast. To balance this out, the government is stepping in, where private investment has dipped. Even though the economy has expanded by over 50% since 2019, actual physical investment in things like buildings and machinery fell by nearly 60%. To fix this, the government is pumping €103 billion into a national development plan through 2030, with €19 billion earmarked for 2026 alone to build the infrastructure a growing population needs. Speaking of the population, that's the perfect segue to our next section, the people. You see, Ireland doesn't just have one national culture. One minute you're in Dublin, which is as cosmopolitan and fast-paced as London or New York, and the next, you're looking out at the Blasket Islands off the coast of Dingle, where life feels like a literal throwback to the 18th century. But no matter where you go, there is one common thread: the gift of the gab. The Irish have a world-class passion for conversation, stories and jokes, and the local pub is the theatre where it all happens. Now don't get me wrong, the pub scene has changed. With smoking bans and stricter driving laws, it's not quite the free for all it was in the 90s. But it's still the focal point of the neighbourhood. It's where you'll hear the Willie Ann pipes, those soulful Irish bagpipes, the fiddle, and the tin whistle. Sometimes you'll even see a Saoilí, a traditional musical gathering that'll have everyone on their feet. And while we're on our feet, we have to talk about the lightning-fast footwork of Irish dance. Most of us know it from the global phenomenon Riverdance, which took traditional jigs and reels and turned them into a massive stage spectacle in the 90s. That same energy carries over into their festivals, like the Wexford Opera Festival, or the massive worldwide party that is St. Patrick's Day. Now, for a tiny island, Ireland's brain gain is absolutely ridiculous. They have produced 4 Nobel Prize winners for literature: W.B. Yeats, George Bernard Shaw, Samuel Beckett, and Seamus Heaney. Whether it's the biting satire of Jonathan Swift or the complex, experimental genius of James Joyce, Irish writers have a way of taking the English language and bending it into something magical. This stems from a long history of seanchai. These are traditional storytellers who passed down myths and hero tales by the fire long before they were ever written down. And that storytelling hasn't stopped, it just moved to the big screen. You've definitely seen the work of Irish actors like Saoirse Ronan, Cillian Murphy and Colin Farrell, or been moved by films like The Crying Game or The Banshees of Inisherin. And of course there's the music. Beyond the traditional sessions, Ireland has exported everything from the stadium-filling anthems of U2 and Bono's global activism to the ethereal, new age vibes of Enya. Whether it's the rock grit of Thin Lizzy or the haunting voice of Sinead O'Connor, the Irish sound is unmistakable. At the end of the day, Ireland has a culture that's deeply rooted in the past, but always has one eye on the future. Look, we've covered the legends, but I want to know what's on your watch list. Is there a piece of Irish cinema or a local musician that perfectly captures that Emerald Isle magic I missed? Put me on to something new down below. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.